welcome to the Legendarium podcast, a weekend edition. This is 2 weeks in a row, which means that this is officially a thing that is happening. I am Craig.
Or at least a month more.
It's a pattern.
We'll see. I'm Craig, your host. Over there, we've got Ryan. He's already talked, and so you've heard him. Kyle, he's already talked, so you've heard him. But we've got a special guest as well. Daniel Greene is joining us all the way from the magical land of Skype. Daniel, welcome.
I'm half convinced you said Skype because you forgot where I actually live.
No, you live in Ohio. You live in Ohio. You're on Eastern time, which makes scheduling a word that I shouldn't use. Welcome, Daniel. If you don't know who Daniel Greene is, you probably, aren't in the fantasy community.
I thought you were going to go like
deeply.
Biggie Smalls with that. Like, if you don't know, now you know, sucka.
Now you know, sucka. Daniel,
That's what you should have done.
Daniel Greene runs a YouTube channel, which conveniently is titled Daniel Greene. So you can find him very easily. That's Green with an E at the end. I think I misspelled your name at one point when I first met you.
It's all good.
Yeah, I'm sure it happens. Anyway,
At least you're not one of these people who calls me Daniel Greene. I don't.
Greene?
That's just
Really?
No.
That's
happened many times.
So if you haven't checked out his channel, if you're at all interested in especially fantasy news, and diving into book reviews, news, and reactions and that sort of thing, it's a great channel. Absolutely go check it out. And Daniel, we are happy to have you with us.
It's awesome to be on. It's one of my favorite podcasts in existence.
Now we have something to live up to, and I'm scared.
We don't do well with expectations.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's get started on today's topic. Today we are talking about how to manage your TBR pile. That's to be read. So this topic is one that is going to be, I'm hoping for contentious. I'm not hoping for violent necessarily, but I know that there will be some differing opinions here on this show. But hopefully some opinion will jibe with our listeners and they'll enjoy it. So a TBR pile, Ryan, do you have one?
I do.
Is it huge? Is it lengthy and long and distinguished?
It formed because of doing this podcast, obviously. I did enjoy reading before. I did do that before, but I didn't really have a pile that existed until the last few years. And it is a very, very large pile, especially considering I try and read ahead and scout ahead to help make decisions about what we should be reading, comparing with the fans, what they want, and being like, yeah, this would be a really good talk for us. This is a good time to do this one. So on top of my own personal enjoyment reading, I'm reading ahead to what the fans want to hear from us, and it is a very steep slope.
I know. I was living a very happy and secure life without a TBR pile before. It was just kind of like, yeah, that sounds fine. I'll read that. And then we start this show, and suddenly people are writing in. And I've said this before. I get emails and Facebook messages and Twitter DMs and whatnot. I get them daily, multiple times daily, with people saying, hey, read this, read that, read this, which is not a complaint. I love getting those emails, partly because it just helps me understand what the current sentiments are.
Craig with the humble brag, ladies and gentlemen. Craig with the humble brag.
Is that what that is?
I'm kind of a big deal.
Please.
Daily emails. You all want me to read things so much. I'm just giving you shit. It's fine.
Yeah, fine. Whatever. Kyle, do you have a TBR pile?
I sort of. It's not. I don't actually have a physical pile of anything. There's obviously a giant thing called the Cosmere that isn't in my TBR pile that I haven't read yet. But I don't really keep track of it.
Yeah.
It's mostly just as it comes.
Well, I mean, that kind of plays in with last week's episode, which if you haven't listened to, I would suggest you go give it a listen. You can find them based on the not numberedness of them. This isn't a regular episode, so they're not numbered. So last week, Kyle and I talked about burnout, and that's a real thing for you currently.
Yep.
And so your TBR pile would shrink dramatically if you don't really feel like reading anything.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, what about you?
I originally did have a paper list of books I wanted to get through. I wrote them down constantly, and then I used the notebook for all sorts like general channel notes and everything, and it got filled up and eventually got thrown out. Now there's a digital one, kind of. It's over 200 listed books, and I basically just like throw a dart at a board to figure out. It's really just whichever one I feel like it. I always say like this is next. I know I'll get to this sooner or later, but I like to enjoy reading, so to many of my subscribers, annoyance. I just kind of pick up whatever I feel like, and I don't plan it out too much. And that way I don't ever feel burnout because I'm reading what I want to read. And, I keep loving what I'm doing.
Well, let me ask you this, though. What happens if what you want to read is, way outside the genre, or it's not for you running this YouTube channel and all that? Maybe it's not strategically smart for you. And so, what I want to read right now is I want to read the Iliad in the original Greek, and nobody's going to watch my YouTube channel about, so what do you do if you feel like I need to force myself to read something off of, off of this TBR pile? Is there something that you do on that?
Usually I'm reading about 2 or 3 books at once, so I'll just slip one in there that's like not traditionally what people like. Like I still love reading history textbooks, and no one wants to hear me talk about, Alexander the Great's fall and, how he his return to Greece. So I'll just read that on the side. And then, during the rest of my reading, I'm doing either sci-fi, fantasy, or Stephen King, which are basically the backbone of my whole channel.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ryan, let me kick it back over to you. With a TBR pile, do you think that there should be or could be a decent strategy with that? Like if somebody's got their nightstand just packed full of books and they're looking at it like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Would you say blow it all up, get rid of your TBR pile entirely, or would you say there's some strategy to it?
First thing I would say is get it off your nightstand. That seems like a terrible, no, legitimately, I think it would be a terrible weight to stare at this pile next to your bed and go, oh, I got to get through all these. No, put it, if you want to have a shelf like our TBR shelf, something like that, something that's out of the way, that's organized, but something that's away from where you read so that you can enjoy whatever you have in front of you at that time.
Yeah.
Like I put my TBR pile is mostly digital because I run through a series of creating the list and then saying, okay, I'm going to get it on Kindle first. If I like it enough, then I'll purchase a hard copy to go into my library here.
Yeah.
I think there's a physical, like even just walking into our studio, there's a physical weight to the amount of books in this room that if I felt like I had to get through all of them would be really strenuous.
So, okay, so let's say I'm looking at our Legendarium TBR shelf. We have a shelf devoted to it, and on that we have, sorry, I'm not actually counting, but 20 books on there?
Yeah.
Is that more intimidating to you than looking at your Kindle and scrolling through 20 titles, on your Kindle and saying, oh, geez, I need to get through all these?
I would say yes, it is a little more intimidating than looking at it on my Kindle because my Kindle also covers, I've got a full library of other books that I have read. So in the scope of things, it looks like a smaller piece where it says, okay, I've only, in my Kindle, I've only got 6 or 7 books I haven't read on my TBR pile in there. But the 40, 50, 60 other books I have in there I have read. So it feels like a smaller piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me.
Versus looking at that whole shelf and saying, yep, that's all got to be read. Thankfully, I've already read 9 of them.
I'm shocked at how much you make your way through. I don't know how you do it exactly because I have
an hour-long commute both
I have
ways.
a commute too. Look, I've got a commute too. In fact, we both have, all 3 of us now have the same commute essentially. And I can't make my way through the same number of books. At least I should say the same number of fantasy books, but that gets back to our burnout episode. So yeah, it's shocking to me that how many books we read on this podcast and how many more books you have read specifically. Okay, so let me.
Can I actually ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Is anyone here able to walk and read? Because I found that to be one of the biggest determining factors in being able to get through books. If you're able to just do things and read simultaneously,
yeah,
those are the people I know that crank.
Yeah.
Everyone here says they can do that? Okay.
So are you saying read or listen? Because now we have to get into the question of audiobooks. But what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I mean, I physically can walk around reading a book. I'll ride a bike and read a book, which might kill me one day.
That will in fact kill you one day.
But I'm really good at multitasking and having a physical book in my hand or having some headphones on and listening to Michael Kramer or Kate Redding's phenomenal voices deliver a book to me. And I find a lot of people just do not. I don't mean to be one of these people on a high horse saying like they're better. I'm better because I can do that. No, not at all. My brain's dumb. That's why I can do this. So I'm able to really zone out on one task and focus on another, and have the other ones going in the background of the head. Is that do you count that or no? Do you think no? You're not allowed. You can't actually absorb a book if you're multitasking.
It's a great question. Now I need to tell my high horse to get all the way on the other side of the room, for a little while, so I'm not tempted. I do have opinions about how much can be absorbed, but everybody is a little bit different. But I do think there's a limit. There's a limit somewhere. You get those people who say, no, I read a book a day. Or, maybe it's not that extreme. Maybe it's like 3 books a week or something. And when it's in the fantasy genre, especially when we're dealing with books that are 300, 350, 400,000 words long, no, you don't. You don't read those books. You've held them. You've looked at them. You know what the character names are, maybe, but you haven't read the book, And so I think there is a limit to it. But everybody's capability as far as multitasking and whatnot is different. And so I'm happy to allow for, some wiggle room there. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I think it just depends on what kind of mental energy you have to exert in a certain task. And I agree with you. I think if you are, some people are able to just kind of have that on in the background, like Daniel was saying, and they can still absorb quite a lot, especially, with what we do where we absorb a story, but then we have to then go and talk about that story.
Yeah.
For me, I have to put put forth mental effort to compile my thoughts on it. Basically as I read.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd get down to this podcast and I would have nothing to say because I would have forgotten
My go-to move.
Yeah, everything. Exactly. It would have been just cliff notes, basically, that I would remember. So, yeah, it's
I will also say it drastically comes down to writing style. Like, I can't multitask listen to George R. Martin's writing style. I need to pay attention to what that guy's saying.
Mm-hmm.
But if it comes to like Dresden Files, where it's, there's nothing wrong with that series at all. I love Dresden Files, but it's written in a much more simplistic way.
Right.
That I can kind of that's just on. You know what I mean? I can have that on like I could have The Office on in the background.
Right.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me.
I found that to be especially true when I was starting to try and go through Malazan. A lot of people that's just one that's been constantly harped on us since pretty much we started. You need to read Malazan, you need to read Malazan. And so I'm listening to the audiobook of Malazan because that's how I'm able to get through so much is through listening to it. And if I'm doing anything else while listening to a Malazan book, I can't stay into the story at all. All of a sudden I find myself just going, we're like 3 character points of view away from what I last remember. I don't
zone out and
what's going on.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I can multitask kind of within a certain limit.
But I just want you to know, you just gave, I don't know, 80% of our listeners, they want us to do Malazan so bad.
I know.
They're like, Ryan's reading Malazan. Send up the flares.
I posted on Reddit that I had read the first book and had some, like, was really questioning what I had just read. And everyone was like, it's okay. Come back. Keep reading it. That's exactly what it was like. I'm kind of creeped out by this cult-like attitude going on right now, but it's great.
Anyway, sorry, you were saying.
But no, it's so like for me, I can't listen to a book if there's something else with text or voice going on. So like if I'm at work and I'm having to type something up, whatever I'm listening to can't have any text or any voice. I've got to go to instrumental music. Mm-hmm. So audiobooks go off. But if I'm out running or if I'm doing anything that doesn't require me to process other words other than the ones coming in through the audiobook, that's usually my go-to.
Yep, absolutely. Sorry, Daniel, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say I just started my reread of Gardens of the Moon, which is the first Malazan book, and I'm digging it again. So if your viewers are interested in seeing my dumb face talk about it, I'll be doing a review soon.
What we'll need to do is we always need an expert guide to take us at least through the first book in a series, and so we'll call you up.
There you go.
And have you take us through Gardens of the Moon. I was going to say, regarding how much you can process when you're reading a book, we're kind of talking about that particular issue. I think it is a little bit different. You were saying this, Kyle, where it's like every book that we read for the podcast, it's like, yeah, you're reading a book and you're doing a book report on it for thousands of people, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of pressure to really understand and absorb and analyze and all this stuff. But I do want to say that on that note, as far as if we're talking about how quickly somebody can make their way through a TBR pile, how much effort they should be putting into the books, in a way, we should all be thinking that much about the books that we read, depending on the book, of course. Okay, maybe Todd goes a little overboard analyzing Dresden Files. That's fine. I'm open to that argument. But if someone is just making their way through a TBR pile in order to say that they've done it, and they're just tearing through books and they're not comprehending it, they're not thinking about it, they're not analyzing it, they're not taking any of the stuff from the fiction and bringing it into their lives, then it's lost and there's no point to it.
I don't agree with that entirely.
Yeah.
Somewhat, yes. Reading for the sake of saying I've read so many books is how you got a free pizza in elementary school.
But you know what? Free pizza is great. So,
but there is nothing wrong with reading a book simply to see how it affects you. Like not analyzing, just going through and just reading it and going, okay.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. You're seeing how it affects you. I think that's not the way that a lot of people read books.
But I think a lot of people read books just for the surface level enjoyment and story and out of habit, and it's routine. Like I think some people sit down and read for an hour before they go to bed at night, and maybe the purpose of that isn't necessarily to absorb or get out of the story, whatever we're talking about. Maybe it really is just, this is my routine. This is something that I enjoy, and this is how I wind down. And maybe they'll run across something that will catch their attention, and they'll sink deeper into it. And maybe they'll just skim across the surface, and it'll be kind of like scenery for them.
I think that's how most people read their books. I think we're all a little bit crazy for the way we read books, but that's why we want to talk about them like this. Most people are just, let's get enjoyment. Let's enjoy what we read. Most people don't want to come across a horrific book so they can do this deep dive into why it's so bad.
No, we've talked about the 3-level theory on the Legendarium for years now. And so to quickly reiterate, the idea is all books can strive toward 3 different levels. The first being surface level story, the second being social and political commentary, and the third being personal betterment, or personal commentary, I guess. I would be the first to say that there is value in simple enjoyment. My favorite example that I give all the time is, what's it called? Pacific Rim. There's nothing wrong with spending 2 hours watching Pacific Rim, even though it doesn't have a ton of life lessons for us to glean, right?
Robots punching robots in the face.
Exactly. So
monsters.
Yeah.
For me, it's any movie with early 2000s Angelina Jolie. That is just, I will watch that.
Yeah.
The jokes. I'm holding them back. See this, Ryan? Self-control.
I believe it. The Tomb Raider series is a highlight of our society.
Well, it's a highlight of all of our adolescences. That's for damn sure. Okay. Anyway, no, but I guess my point is, when you read a book, let's take one of our most popular episodes is the Oathbringer episodes, right? If you read a book like Oathbringer and you do it solely for the level 1 and you go into it knowing that I'm just kind of skating across the surface, then it's almost, I feel like it's disrespectful. I also feel like we're getting really far afield from the subject, and so maybe we should bring it back. But I guess my point is that with a tall TBR pile, if you're running through it just to run through it, you're doing these books a disservice.
I want to give you an
just missing
example.
out.
I want to give you an example of something. I was in New York last year, I think, and I had a few hours that I was trying to figure out what to do. Didn't have enough time to go, see a show or do anything. It was in the middle of the day. So I walked into an art gallery. I paid for a ticket to go into this French art gallery that's near the Met, and walked through that. I don't have a history. I don't understand the art. I don't anything. I just walked through just to see the paintings. It's here. I was not moved by anything. I can't tell you anything about what's going on there, but I still think it was a good experience.
Why?
Just
why was it a good experience?
Because I got to see something different.
So?
And I was there. That's what I'm saying. The argument that if you don't find deeper meaning in it, that it's a waste. I don't think it was a waste for me to go in there.
But no. My point is, you are finding some deeper meaning in just the fact that you saw something different. You didn't just walk through the Met and look at the paintings. You did go in there and felt something just by virtue of the fact that you did something different. You are doing just a little more than skimming through. right?
But I did that by the process of just skimming through. That's what I'm saying is I don't like as a reader do with Oathbringer, for example, if you just read it for the top level stuff and that's all that you got out of it, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's your it's not a there's more there for you if you want it, but you're not in any way disrespecting the book or anything like that.
Right, right. Okay, well, I'm just gonna grab the reins and yank as hard as I can. I know that I'm as guilty as anybody of going off topic here, but I want to bring it back to the idea of the TBR pile, and let's just say you're like us. We've got a shelf full of 20 books. It's about to be like 25 once all my Amazon shipments come in, and you're sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? I got to get through all these. This is a year-long project. What am I going to do? I have an idea that I want to run by Daniel and see what you think of this. My idea would be to take a look at your TBR pile and start sorting it into different categories, and make sure that you're swapping in and out of different categories. So maybe it's epic fantasy and urban fantasy, and then I would encourage people to make sure that in their TBR list they've got some history books and science books, biographies, something else. Get out of the whatever genre you're most comfortable in. Make sure you're out of that a little bit. But if you do that, if you sort it into sections and then kind of order it in that way, like fantasy's my favorite, so I'm gonna read 2 fantasy books, but then I'm gonna dip into this other section of my TBR pile. I wonder if that would help us to carve through that thing and do it in a way that would be more enjoyable, right? What do you think?
I like that. The only thing I would add on, I actually really like that because I think that helps like mentally overcome a lot of the hurdles of like, oh, I got to keep reading. Like it tricks you into thinking you're not forcing yourself to read. You're just picking up a new category, a new something else. It might help that provide that difference that I feel a lot of people who feel forced to stick with like higher epic fantasy eventually feel. Because, if you haven't read Malazan and A Song of Ice and Fire and Wheel of Time, are you really a fantasy fan? People have that mentality. So people feel like they need to binge those 3 series, and I feel like that's a good way to break them up, is to have these other categories where I'm going to go pull from over here for a minute. I like that.
Can
quite
I?
a bit. What I would.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
Go ahead.
Daniel.
I was going to add, just on top of that, recently I had great success in just reading the first chapter of like 5 books I know I want to get to, and whichever one just grabbed me most is the one I read.
Oh,
I had
that.
great luck with that. I read the first chapter of Rage of Dragons, and that was the one that won out because the first chapter of that just hooked me like that. And then I read probably my favorite book of the year so far, and I wouldn't have gotten to it for another 2 or 3 months if I hadn't had the ability to go, okay, which one of these is appealing to me the most after 20 pages.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I kind of want to go back to your earlier point, though, about if you're reading back to back to back epic fantasy series or whatever and putting something in between there. I think that helps with, one, burnout, but also one thing that I noticed while we were reading for the podcast is that there's so many tropes that you get really accustomed to. And if you go back to back with all of these epic fantasy series, it's really just, this is only slightly different from the last book that I read.
It can annoy you a little bit.
It annoyed, but it also starts to blend together. And I think that you don't get the enjoyment out of the individual story that you're reading because you're whether you're doing it on purpose or not, and I know I'm super guilty of this, is I immediately want to compare book I'm reading to book I just finished because the tropes are so similar. And then it's like, oh, well, I didn't like how they decided to do this trope. I really liked the way that Rothfuss did it versus how whoever else did it, or whatever. And it makes it so you're not enjoying the actual story in front of you as much.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
That's a really good point, and it makes me want to say something I might get some flack for, but
Perfect.
not all of fantasy, but a lot of fantasy is still extraordinarily formulaic, and is still a lot of authors to this day publishing in 2019 are still just going through Tolkien's formula, and it can be very tedious to get through all that. I mean, especially if you're going back to back. There are just stories to this day where it's, okay, it's not Frodo, his name's Fred. Like it's almost that bad occasionally.
Fredo.
Exactly.
The Godfather is just a massive Tolkien ripoff. If
First
you think
name
about
Al.
it.
Yeah. So throwing in
Alfredo.
like a subgenre of fantasy, like some Dresden Files or some of Stephen King's more fantastical works, can really be refreshing. It's almost like when you're refreshing your palate between whiskey tastings. I don't know why that's where my mind went, but that.
You're a man of the world, Daniel.
There you go.
I would actually throw in as a subgenre of fantasy. I've been thinking about this recently. Pre-Tolkien fantasy. People should maybe think about that in their TBR piles. We're going to be talking with Brent Weeks on an Author's Shelf episode about the Odyssey of all things. That is going to be an interesting episode. But even if we go into like the 19th century, go read George MacDonald. And his fantasy had a big effect on Tolkien when he was writing The Hobbit. And so, you're talking about these formulas and how we can manage our expectations around these cliches, the fantasy cliches and stuff. I think it's kind of fun to see where they came from. And see that, that the elves with the pointy ears and the dwarves that live underground and all that, those kind of fantasy cliches. So I've been thinking about that recently.
You get into some really interesting stories when you do that. I mean, the fairy tale influences, as well as, the classics like Beowulf. You can go to the Greek mythology, Norse mythology. But I like how it does slowly, if you go back far enough in fantasy, just becomes the religions. You just eventually are reading Norse mythology, and that's your fantasy. And I like that, though. It's cool how we've transitioned down from there.
And now that's just metal. Now you're just reading basically metal band names in book form.
I actually used Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book to break up in between series reading a while ago, just a few months back.
That's a good one.
It's a great one.
By the way, are you ready for? We need at least one patented Legendarium tangent on this episode. So here's mine.
Haven't we done several already?
We just didn't patent them.
This one it's got the mark on it. I recently watched a movie on Amazon Prime called Heavy Trip, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is a Finnish comedy about a heavy metal band from a small village in Finland that needs to make it to it's like a road comedy. They need to get to this metal festival in Norway, and so they take their dead buddy's corpse on a coffin, strap it to the top of a van, and they bust through the Norwegian border to go to this metal show. It is the funniest thing I've seen in a long time. And there's a little bit of Norse mythology stuff in there for you to.
There you go.
There's my tie-in.
Oddly, the lower the budget for that movie, the more interested I am in watching it. I feel like the more it just has the vibe of some guys recorded that over like a weekend, the more I want to watch it.
It's an actual corpse.
It is. It's Finnish cinema, so it's not exactly high budget. So I really, 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 really recommend it if you want a good laugh. It's in Finnish, it's subtitled, and so that's something if you hate subtitles, I guess. But anyway. Okay, guys, should we wrap this up? Any further thoughts on TBR piles as we get ready to finish up this little mini episode?
I would say don't force it.
Okay, what do you mean?
Just like we were talking about, if you're trying to read through it just to get through it, then
stop. Go watch a movie.
Do something else.
No value of having a TBR pile just to have a TBR pile.
Yeah, it doesn't make you
Ask yourself
smarter,
why you got it.
or like Daniel was saying, it doesn't make you more of an epic fantasy fan because you finished through it or whatever.
Yeah.
Don't force it.
You could have just read Witcher 40 times in your life. You are just as big a fantasy fan as me. That's totally fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's I was just kind of laughing with Ryan before we started the episode about how one of my dirty secrets in the fantasy community is that compared to a lot of people, I'm not that widely read, but I'm quite deeply read in a few areas, right?
Yes.
So now, and I think going along with your comment, Kyle, I would say take stock of your TBR pile every once in a while, and if there are books at the bottom of it that keep getting pushed off, then get them out of there. Yeah, put them on another shelf somewhere in the house. They'll still be there, or give them to Goodwill or whatever. I don't care. But get them out of your TBR pile because they're stressing you out, right? You obviously, right now, you don't want to read them. Maybe you will later, and that's fine. They'll still be there for you. But if there's something that keeps getting pushed off, I'm reminded of my Spotify playlists. I've got like 50 of them. And they're, every so often I'll go and look and it's like, oh, I haven't listened to those 20 in a long time. Delete. Those songs will still be around later, but it's kind of stressing me out to have this giant list of music. Anyway, TBR piles, maybe the same thing. Ryan,
On
any?
top,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
okay, sorry. I was going to say on top of that, just if you buy copies of the books you want to read you don't care about, get a cheap $2 paperback so you can just carry it with you and abuse it and you'll actually read it. Don't have these nice hardbacks you don't want to take outside. Have a piece of crap copy that you can take into a doctor's office and, throw at your kid if they're getting riled up. Have one that's a tool and a book.
Future star parent, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, well, very good. So we feel like we're good on this subject, Ryan?
Yeah, I can't think of any great wisdom that we can impart on a TBR list from here.
Well, it is something that came up on our Discord server, and so I want to thank our Discord members for throwing out this suggestion of a topic for us to talk about. So if you haven't yet, check us out on Discord or other locations. We're on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the places, and we'd love to hear from you at all of them. So the last thing I'll mention, patreon.com/legendarium is where you can go support the show if you enjoy what we do. If you've been enjoying this for a while and been thinking about joining us on Patreon, think of it like a tip jar. That's the way I'm kind of thinking of it now. $1 per episode is an awesome contribution, and we would be eternally grateful. So patreon.com/legendarium is where you can go to do that. All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Make sure you go to Daniel Greene's channel on YouTube and subscribe to that if you, for some reason, have not yet done so. I would be shocked if you haven't, but you should. And we will see you on Monday for our continuation of the Hobbit series that we're doing. We'll see you then.